In Rigoletto, you have two distinct societies. On one hand, you have the all-powerful Duke and his cronies, and he has all the power in the world. On the other side, you have the entertainers. You have Rigoletto, who's a jester, and the story of Rigoletto is the tragedy that ensues from the clash between those two parts of society. I love telling psychological stories. I love getting into the minds of the characters. Rigoletto offers a great opportunity to do that because in this world that we created, from the moment that Rigoletto is being cursed, his deformity gets worse and worse, both physically and mentally. He starts to be a little unstable. He starts to see things, and we have an opportunity in this production to get into his world and see the things that he sees that eventually ends up in his demise.
This production was previously done in Houston a couple of years ago, so it's about putting it together and basically remounting the show. However, when you remount a show, it's supposed to be done exactly the way it was before, but we of course don't have the exact same cast people that previously did this show. So that means there are certain modifications that end up being made for the cast, for the story, but still the overall arc is the same. What ends up happening in most companies is a stage manager gets anywhere from a week to 2 weeks or 3 days to prepare. We make sure we set up the room. If the props aren't coming with the show, then we have to pull rehearsal props. We have to set up the room. It's about disseminating information to different groups of people so that we can get the show up and running. And generally what happens during the rehearsal process is that sometimes performers come in late.
10 minutes to top of show, 5 minutes to places.
Or like during the day when we rehearse and we don't always have the chorus or the supers, we end up kind of stepping in and helping with scene shifts and those kind of things in the rehearsal room, which is different than when we're on stage.
The fight director choreographs and works with all the fights, violence, moments of tension, quite often moments of physicality on stage, who and what they are and how they hold themselves, that can also come into it. Then of course choreographing the fights themselves, whether it's daggers, unarmed, swords, weapons, guns, any of the above. Part of the training with it, which is where I work with them for weeks and weeks with them and diligently make sure I'm watching them from an expert eye, that they're safe. But of course they have to do it for real, on stage, you know, on the right points, on the right cues. And that's a very obvious thing to say, but in film and TV, they can just do it again. They can cut, go again. They can't do that here. And so there's that added sense of pressure. So yeah, for that point of view, which is why it's very important, we really practice, practice, practice. Like with everything, practice makes perfect.
Every story, powerful stories, are valid regardless of the time period that they're being told, because there's something about the human condition that they tell that rings true. If you look at Rigoletto, the play itself takes place in the 16th century in Mantua. Verdi wrote it in 1851. Yet the story about parenthood, about power, abuse of power, the abuse of innocence, which happens with this young girl who falls in love with this powerful guy, is something that we see in society again and again, regardless of the century. Every time I come back to Rigoletto, I see it from a different standpoint. Since the first time I've done Rigoletto, a couple of decades ago, I became a father. And so today, when I do Rigoletto, when I direct it, I see the characters differently than I ever did before, because ultimately it's also a story about parenthood.
Almost every theater and every opera company, they have a load-in week. So today basically starts with our guys unloading a truck full of seasoned lighting gear, rental lighting gear, and once it's off the truck, is they organize it, and they've spent a week prepping all of the equipment so that when it shows up, we know what to do with it and where it goes and where it gets hung on the pipes. This is their dedicated week to make sure that everything that you see works effortlessly and works the way it should, I'm here to not only supervise, but also to make sure that any questions that come up can be answered. What's interesting about the Rigoletto is we have this big house unit that's on a turntable. Once the scenery gets loaded in, any changes that we need to do with the overhead lighting, we have to be very specific and careful about, because once this big house unit is in, it's not like we can just bring this pipe back in because now there's scenery in the way. So any questions that come up during this load-in process, we try to answer and execute right away, because we know that once the set is loaded in, it might be a little bit more difficult to actually make edits or make changes that we need to.